Take a calm breath. Get into a comfortable position and slowly relax. Now I'm letting you drift into the flow of the story. Snow was falling the day you arrived. Not a heavy storm. Just quiet flakes drifting gently through the cold afternoon air. The village looked as though it had been wrapped in a soft white blanket. Stone cottages lined the narrow streets. Thin streams of smoke rose from old chimneys. Warm golden lights glowed behind frosted windows. Everything felt peaceful, as if the world had decided to slow down for winter. You pulled your wool coat a little tighter and carried your suitcase across the snow-covered square. In your pocket rested a small brass key. It was old, slightly worn. Someone had polished it many times over the years. The estate agent had handed it to you that morning with a smile. This little shop has been waiting for someone. At the time, you weren't sure what he meant. Now, standing in the middle of the quiet village, you were beginning to understand. At the end of a narrow street stood a small wooden building. A simple sign hung above the door. Winter Light Candle Shop. The letters had faded with time, but they were still beautiful. A tiny brass bell chimed softly as you unlocked the door. Warm air welcomed you inside. The room smelled of beeswax, vanilla, cinnamon, pine, and something sweet you couldn't quite recognize. The shelves were lined with candles of every shape and size. Tall white candles, tiny round candles, glass jars tied with linen ribbon. Some looked brand new. Others had clearly been made many winters ago. It felt less like entering a shop, and more like stepping into someone's memories. You closed the door behind you. Outside, snow continued to fall in silence. Inside, everything was still. Near the fireplace stood a large wooden table. Its surface was covered with old candle molds, measuring cups, and carving tools. Someone had left everything exactly where it belonged. As if they believed another candle maker would someday continue their work. You ran your hand gently across the table. The wood was smooth from years of use. Beside it lay a thick notebook. Its leather cover had darkened with age. You opened the first page. In careful handwriting, only one sentence had been written. Every candle carries a little piece of warmth into someone's life. You smiled. The words felt less like instructions, and more like a welcome. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. You opened the windows for a few minutes to let fresh winter air inside. You dusted the shelves, straightened a few candles that had leaned over, lit the small stove near the back of the shop. Soon, gentle warmth filled the room. Outside, the snow became heavier. The village grew even quieter. As evening approached, you noticed a small movement outside the window. A fluffy orange cat sat on the front step. Its fur looked almost golden beneath the lantern hanging above the door. It stared at you calmly. You smiled and opened the door. "Would you like to come inside?" The cat didn't hesitate. It walked in as though it had done so every winter. It carefully inspected every corner of the shop. Then it circled the warm rug beside the stove 3 times before curling into a comfortable ball. Within moments, it was asleep. You laughed softly. "I suppose you've decided to stay." The cat gave no answer. Only the slow, peaceful sound of sleeping. Outside, snowflakes continued dancing beneath the lantern light. You placed a kettle on the stove. Soon, the quiet sound of gently boiling water filled the room. You made yourself a cup of hot herbal tea. Holding the warm cup between your hands, you sat beside the window. The village square was almost empty now. A few people walked home carrying baskets. Children laughed somewhere in the distance. A horse-drawn sleigh rolled slowly across the fresh snow. Everything moved without hurry, without noise, without pressure. For the first time in a very long while, you felt your shoulders relax. You realized something. You hadn't come here simply to own a candle shop. You had come here because somewhere deep inside, you had been searching for a place where life still moved at the speed of falling snow. As darkness settled over the village, you lit the first candle. A small beeswax candle. Its golden flame flickered gently. One candle became 2. Then 3. Soon, warm light filled every corner of the little shop. Outside, winter covered the village in white. Inside, tiny flames quietly welcomed you home. And somehow, it already felt like you belonged. The next morning, you woke before sunrise. For a moment, you forgot where you were. Then you heard it. The quiet crackling of the stove downstairs. The gentle wind brushing against the windows. And the peaceful silence that only snowy mornings seemed to carry. You smiled. You were home. After making a cup of hot tea, you walked downstairs. The orange cat was already awake. It sat patiently beside the front door, as if waiting for the shop to open. "Good morning," you said. The cat blinked slowly. You decided to take that as a greeting. Outside, fresh snow covered the village once again. No footprints. No wagon tracks. Only smooth white fields stretching across the little square. You unlocked the front door. The brass bell gave its familiar cheerful ring. Cold winter air drifted inside. It carried the scent of pine trees and fresh snow. You lit the first candle of the morning. Then another. And another. Soon, the little shop glowed with warm golden light. The snow outside suddenly looked even brighter through the frosted windows. As you dusted one of the shelves, your eyes fell upon the old leather notebook again. You picked it up carefully. Yesterday, you had only read the first page. Today, you turned to the next. At the top of the page, someone had written, "Winter candle number 3. Below it was a simple recipe. Beeswax. A little pine oil. Dried orange peel. A pinch of cinnamon." At the bottom, another sentence had been added. "This candle reminds people that even the coldest winter has warmth inside it." You couldn't help smiling. This wasn't just a recipe book. It was full of little memories. Each candle had a story. Each scent carried a feeling. Curious, you decided to try. You gathered everything you needed. A block of golden beeswax. A small copper pot. Natural oils. Dried herbs stored inside tiny glass jars. You carefully melted the wax over low heat. The room slowly filled with the rich scent of warm honey. Next came the pine oil. Immediately, it smelled like a quiet forest after fresh snowfall. Then you added cinnamon. Finally, tiny pieces of dried orange peel floated across the surface. The fragrance became warm, bright, comforting, almost like winter itself. You poured the mixture into an old glass jar, placed the cotton wick in the center. Then you waited. The hardest part of making candles, you discovered, was not creating them. It was allowing them time to become ready. The notebook had been right. Some things simply could not be rushed. While the candle cooled, someone knocked gently on the door. A cheerful elderly woman stepped inside. Snow covered her boots. Her knitted scarf was almost as large as her coat. She smiled kindly. "You must be our new candle maker." You returned the smile. "I suppose I am. My name is Eleanor. I've lived here all my life." Her eyes wandered around the shop. "It smells exactly like it used to." You looked surprised. "You knew the previous owner?" She nodded. "For many years. He believed every season deserved its own light." She paused for a moment. Winter was always his favorite. Before leaving, Eleanor chose a small vanilla candle. When you wrapped it carefully in brown paper, she smiled. "It isn't the candle people remember most. It's how they felt when they carried it home." Her words stayed with you long after she had left. That evening, your first winter candle had finally cooled. You lit it carefully. The little flame danced quietly. Within moments, the scent of pine, cinnamon, and orange filled every corner of the shop. The orange cat stretched beside the stove. Outside, snowflakes drifted beneath the lantern. Inside, everything felt warm. Not because of the fire. Not because of the candles. but because, little by little, this little shop was beginning to feel like part of your own story. A few days later, the snow finally stopped. For the first time since your arrival, the morning sky was bright blue. Sunlight reflected across the snow like thousands of tiny crystals. The whole village sparkled. After opening the shop and lighting the first candle of the day, you noticed a folded note resting beneath the brass bell. It hadn't been there the night before. You unfolded it carefully. In neat handwriting, it read, "Winter market, today. Fresh beeswax, herbs, spices, and handmade goods. The old village square." At the bottom of the note, someone had added one more sentence. "Every candle begins with a walk through the market." You smiled. Whoever had owned the shop before seemed to leave little pieces of advice everywhere. The orange cat stretched lazily beside the stove. "I suppose you'll be watching the shop?" The cat barely opened one eye. You decided that was agreement. After putting on your wool coat, scarf, and gloves, you stepped outside. Fresh snow crunched beneath your boots. The village square was already coming to life. Wooden stalls stood beneath snow-covered roofs. Strings of warm lanterns hung overhead. The air smelled of cinnamon, roasted chestnuts, and hot apple cider. Children laughed as they pulled little wooden sleds across the snow. Soft music drifted through the square. Everything felt warm despite the cold. Your first stop was a small wooden stand covered with blocks of golden beeswax. Behind it stood an elderly beekeeper with a thick white beard. "Good morning," he said with a smile. "You must be the new candle maker. It surprised you how quickly everyone seemed to know you." "I am." The beekeeper picked up a block of beeswax and handed it to you. "Go on. Smell it." You did. It carried the gentle scent of wildflowers, warm honey, and summer sunshine. It was hard to believe such warmth could still exist in the middle of winter. "The bees made this during the longest days of the year," the beekeeper explained. "Now it helps brighten the shortest ones." You bought several blocks. As he wrapped them carefully, he said, "The best candles don't just light a room. They remind people that spring always returns." You thanked him and continued through the market. At the next stall, bundles of dried lavender, rosemary, pine needles, and cedar branches hung from wooden beams. A cheerful woman welcomed you. "Looking for winter scents?" You nodded. "I've just started learning." She smiled. "Then let the season teach you." She invited you to smell each herb. Lavender was calm. Pine smelled like quiet forests. Cedar reminded you of old wooden cabins. Dried orange peel brought a little sunshine into the cold air. You filled a small basket with ingredients. The woman tucked one extra bundle inside. "What is this?" you asked. "Juniper." "It wasn't on my list." She laughed softly. "The best ingredients rarely are." As the afternoon sun settled lower in the sky, you wandered through the rest of the market. You found handmade ceramic jars perfect for candles. Soft linen ribbons. Tiny wooden labels carved by a local craftsman. Everything seemed to have been made with patience. No one hurried. No one rushed a conversation. People smiled. Stopped to chat. Shared stories. It reminded you that this village measured time differently. On your way back to the shop, snow began falling once again. Only a few gentle flakes. The kind that made the world quieter instead of colder. When you opened the shop door, the orange cat was exactly where you had left it. It looked at the basket in your hands with quiet curiosity. You unpacked everything onto the wooden work table. Golden beeswax. Bundles of herbs. Fresh pine. Dried oranges. Small glass jars. For a long moment, you simply stood there, looking at all the ingredients, thinking of all the candles they would become. Not just candles. Small pieces of comfort. Little lights for dark evenings. Warm gifts carried home through falling snow. Outside, winter continued softly. Inside, Your workshop was slowly filling with the sense of a season that felt both peaceful and full of quiet wonder. The days became wonderfully familiar. Each morning began the same way. You unlocked the front door. The little brass bell welcomed the day. You lit the first candle, placed a kettle on the stove, and opened the curtains just enough for the pale winter sunlight to fill the shop. The orange cat had already claimed its favorite place beside the fire. It stretched lazily every morning, as if it had lived there forever. The candle shop slowly became part of the village. Some people came to buy candles. Others simply came to escape the cold for a little while. Nobody ever seemed to be in a hurry. One snowy afternoon, just as you were pouring warm wax into a glass jar, the bell above the door rang. A young woman stepped inside, brushing snow from her coat. Beside her stood a little boy. He couldn't have been older than 8. He wore a thick green scarf that covered half his face. His eyes immediately wandered across the shelves filled with glowing candles. "They're beautiful," he whispered. The woman smiled. "This is my son, Oliver. He has been asking about your shop every day." Oliver looked at you nervously. "Do you really make every candle by hand?" "I do." His eyes grew even wider. Can I see?" You looked toward the empty work table. Then back at Oliver. "I think you can do even better." His eyebrows lifted. "Would you like to make one yourself?" He nodded so quickly that his scarf nearly slipped off. His mother laughed. I don't think I've ever seen him say yes that fast. You helped Oliver tie on a small linen apron. It was a little too big for him. The sleeves almost covered his hands. Together, you prepared the ingredients. Golden beeswax, a cotton wick, a small clay bowl, and a few dried orange peels. Oliver watched every movement carefully. "This smells like Christmas," he said. You smiled. "It smells like winter." He thought for a moment. "I think winter smells nicer." You melted the wax together. Slowly, patiently. As the warm honey scent filled the room, Oliver couldn't stop smiling. "What happens now?" "Now we wait." "For how long?" "Long enough." He sighed dramatically. "Waiting is difficult." The orange cat opened one eye. As if it completely agreed. While the candle cooled, you showed Oliver the old notebook. You opened it to a page you hadn't read before. At the top, someone had written, "For a child's first candle." Below it was another small note. "Don't worry if it isn't perfect. The first light is always the most memorable." You quietly read the words aloud. Oliver smiled. "I like that." "So do I." When the wax had finally hardened, Oliver carefully lit his candle. The little flame flickered softly. His face glowed with quiet pride. "I made this." "Yes, you said." "You did." His mother wiped away a small tear. "I think he'll remember today for a very long time." Before they left, Oliver wrapped his candle in brown paper all by himself. He held it carefully with both hands. At the door, he suddenly turned back. "When I grow up, I want to make things that make people feel warm." You smiled. "I think that's a wonderful idea." After they disappeared into the falling snow, the shop became quiet again. You looked around at the hundreds of candles resting on the shelves. Some were large. Some were small. Some had taken hours to make. Others only minutes. But every single one carried something more than wax and fragrance. A memory. A feeling. A quiet moment someone would carry home. That evening, you opened the notebook once more. For the first time, you added your own sentence beneath the old candlemaker's words. Today, a little boy discovered that warmth can be made by hand. You closed the notebook gently. Outside, snow continued falling beneath the lantern. Inside, another small memory had quietly found its place. Winter settled deeper over the village. Snow rested on rooftops day after day. The river beyond the hills had frozen. Even the trees seemed quieter now. Inside the candle shop, however, Warmth never disappeared. Every morning began with the familiar routine. The little brass bell. The first candle. The kettle singing softly on the stove. And the orange cat stretching beside the fire. It had become a rhythm you loved. One quiet afternoon, while searching for extra candle jars, you noticed something unusual. Behind a tall wooden shelf stood a narrow door. You were certain it hadn't caught your attention before. Its paint had faded with age. A small iron handle rested beneath a thin layer of dust. You gently turned the handle. The door opened with a quiet creak. Behind it was a steep wooden staircase leading upward. The orange cat immediately stood without looking back. It began climbing the stairs. "So, you've known about this all along." The cat continued climbing. You followed. Each step groaned softly beneath your boots. The air grew cooler. The scent of beeswax slowly mixed with the smell of old wood. At the top of the stairs, sunlight streamed through a round window covered in frost. You stepped into a forgotten workshop. Dust floated peacefully through the light. Old shelves covered the walls. Wooden molds of stars, pine cones, snowflakes, and little cottages rested neatly beside one another. Copper pots hung above a large workbench. Bundles of dried herbs still dangled from the ceiling. It felt as though someone had simply stepped outside and never returned. You walked slowly through the room. Everything had been carefully arranged. Nothing looked abandoned, only patiently waiting. Near the window stood an old rocking chair. A thick wool blanket rested across its back. Beside it sat a tiny wooden table. On top was a framed photograph. You carefully picked it up. The picture showed an elderly candle maker standing outside the shop. Beside him sat the very same orange cat. You looked down. The cat rubbed gently against your leg. "You've been here for a long time." The cat answered with a quiet purr. Inside one of the drawers, you found another notebook. Smaller than the first. Its pages were filled with sketches instead of recipes. Beautiful candle designs. Tiny notes. Ideas for winter collections. On one page, someone had drawn a lantern-shaped candle. Below it were the words, "Light is most beautiful when it helps someone find their way home." You read the sentence twice, then once more. It stayed with you. As the afternoon light faded, you noticed a large wooden chest tucked beneath the workbench. Inside were dozens of unfinished candles. Some had never received their wicks. Others had been carved but never polished. It was as though winter had paused someone's work many years ago. You carefully placed everything back where you had found it. Nothing felt forgotten anymore. Before leaving, you opened the small round window. Cold winter air drifted inside. From upstairs, the village looked even more peaceful. Children were building a snowman near the square. Smoke curled from chimneys. The church bell echoed softly through the snowy streets. You smiled. One day, you thought, this workshop will be filled with light again. That evening, after closing the shop, you carried one small lantern upstairs. You placed it on the old workbench. Its gentle glow spread across the room. The wooden molds. The copper pots. The old notebooks. The rocking chair. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything somehow felt alive again. The orange cat jumped onto the rocking chair and curled into the blanket. You laughed quietly. "I think you've been waiting for someone." The cat closed its eyes. Outside, snowflakes drifted through the winter sky. Inside, the forgotten workshop welcomed its first light in many years. And for the first time, it no longer felt forgotten. The first week of February arrived with fresh snow. The rooftops wore thick white blankets. Icicles sparkled beneath every window. The village looked quieter than ever. One morning, as you swept the snow from the steps outside your shop, you heard someone calling your name. It was Eleanor. She walked carefully through the snow, carrying a small wicker basket. "Good morning." "Good morning," you replied with a smile. She handed you an envelope tied with a dark green ribbon. "It's for you." You untied the ribbon and opened it. Inside was a beautifully printed invitation. Winter Lantern Festival. Tonight, in the village square. Everyone is welcome. At the bottom, written by hand, was one extra sentence. "Please bring one candle made with your own hands." You looked up. "I've never been to this festival." Eleanor smiled. "None of us remember a winter without it." She looked toward your little shop. The candle maker always brought the first light. After she left, you stood quietly for a moment. The first light. It felt like more than a tradition. It felt like a responsibility. You walked upstairs to the old workshop. The lantern-shaped candle sketch rested inside the second notebook. You smiled. "I think today is the right day." All afternoon, you worked carefully. You melted fresh beeswax. Added a little pine. A touch of orange. A whisper of cinnamon. You poured the wax into the old lantern mold you had found upstairs. Then you waited. Outside, snowflakes drifted gently through the village. Inside, time moved slowly, just as it always did. By sunset, the candle was ready. You held it in both hands. It wasn't perfect. A tiny bubble rested near the bottom. One edge wasn't completely smooth. You remembered the words in the notebook. "Don't worry if it isn't perfect." You smiled. Perhaps warmth had never needed perfection. As evening arrived, you carried the lantern candle through the snowy streets. The orange cat followed behind you, leaving tiny paw prints in the fresh snow. The village square was glowing, hundreds of lanterns hung from wooden posts. Children carried little paper lights. Families gathered around large fires. Soft music floated through the cold evening air. There was laughter. Conversation. The comforting smell of hot bread and spiced tea. Yet somehow, the village still felt wonderfully peaceful. Near the center of the square stood an old stone fountain. Beside it rested a large iron lantern. It had not yet been lit. The mayor stepped forward. He smiled when he saw you. "You must be our new candle maker." You nodded. He carefully opened the lantern's glass door. "The first light belongs to you." For a brief moment, everything became quiet. You lit your candle. Its small golden flame appeared. Carefully, you placed it inside the great lantern. The door closed softly. Within seconds, warm light spread across the square. One by one, people lifted their own lanterns. Soon the whole village shimmered beneath the falling snow. Golden lights reflected across the white streets. Children smiled. Neighbors embraced. No one spoke loudly. No one hurried. Everyone simply stood together beneath the winter sky. Eleanor quietly joined you. The previous candle maker always said something. You looked at her. "What did he say?" She smiled. "He said, winter isn't beautiful because of the snow. It's beautiful because people choose to share their light." You watched the lantern glowing in the middle of the square. Its light reflected in every snowy window, every smiling face, every peaceful heart. The orange cat brushed gently against your leg. You looked down and laughed softly. "I think he would have liked tonight." The cat purred. As the evening came to an end, snow continued falling over the little village. But now, it didn't feel cold at all. Because everywhere you looked, someone was carrying a little light home. Winter had reached its quietest days. The snowfall came almost every morning now. The rooftops had disappeared beneath deep layers of white. The frozen river reflected the pale afternoon sky. Your candle shop had become one of the warmest places in the village. Not because of the little stove. Not because of the hot tea. But because people knew they were always welcome. Some stayed only a few minutes. Others spent an hour talking by the fire. Even silence felt comfortable inside your little shop. One afternoon, dark clouds gathered above the mountains. The wind slowly became stronger. Snow began to fall sideways. The villagers looked toward the sky. Everyone knew what was coming. By evening, the snowstorm had arrived. The wind howled between the cottages, snow covered the roads faster than anyone could clear them. The village disappeared behind curtains of white. You locked the shop a little earlier than usual. The orange cat was already asleep beside the stove. You placed another log onto the fire. The room glowed with soft candlelight. Outside, the storm continued. Then, everything became quiet. Not because the storm had ended. Because every light outside suddenly disappeared. The village had lost power. Only the candles inside your shop were still burning. For a moment, you stood silently by the window. The village looked darker than you had ever seen it. Then someone knocked. It was the baker. His cheeks were red from the freezing wind. The electricity is out everywhere. He looked toward your shelves. I think, tonight your candles may become more important than ever. Without saying another word, you nodded. Together, you began wrapping candles. Large ones. Small ones. Lantern candles. Jar candles. Simple beeswax candles. Soon another knock came. Then another. Families. Neighbors. The schoolteacher. The doctor. One by one, the villagers arrived through the snow. No one panicked. No one complained. They simply waited patiently while you wrapped warm little lights for their homes. Some tried to pay. Others had forgotten their wallets. You smiled. We'll worry about that another day. Tonight. Everyone simply needed light. Before long, almost every shelf had become empty. Only one candle remained. The very first winter candle you had made. The one with pine, cinnamon, and orange. You picked it up carefully. There was one place left to visit. You carried the candle through the storm. The snow reached almost to your knees. The orange cat followed close behind. Its tiny footprints disappeared almost as quickly as they appeared. At the edge of the village stood a small cottage. An elderly man lived there alone. When he opened the door, only darkness waited behind him. Without saying anything, you handed him the candle. He smiled gently. I wondered if you would come. You lit the wick. Warm golden light slowly filled the little room. The old man looked at the flame for a long time. My wife used to light a candle every evening. He smiled quietly. It feels like she's visiting again. You stayed only a few minutes. Some moments needed silence more than conversation. As you walked back through the snow, something beautiful caught your eye. One by one, warm lights began appearing across the village. A window here. Another there. Then another. Soon, hundreds of tiny candle flames glowed behind frosted glass. The electricity was still gone. But the village had never looked brighter. When you returned to your shop, you stood outside for a while. Snowflakes drifted gently beneath the lantern above the door. The orange cat sat beside you. Together, you looked across the quiet village. Every home carried a little light. Every light carried a little warmth. And every bit of that warmth had begun right here. Inside one small candle shop, the snowstorm passed quietly. The electricity returned the next morning. Life slowly settled back into its familiar rhythm. But something had changed. Whenever you walked through the village, people smiled a little longer. They waved from their windows. Children greeted you by name. The candle shop had become more than a place to buy candles. It had become part of the village itself. Winter was beginning to soften. The snow still covered the rooftops, but the afternoons felt brighter. Tiny drops of melting ice fell from the eaves. The days grew a little longer. One peaceful morning, you climbed to the old workshop upstairs. The round window was no longer completely covered with frost. Sunlight reached farther across the wooden floor. The orange cat was already sleeping in the rocking chair. You smiled. I had a feeling I'd find you here. The cat stretched without opening its eyes. On the workbench lay the old leather notebook. You opened it slowly. There were only a few blank pages left. You turned to the final written page. In careful handwriting, the old candle maker had left one last message. One day, this shop will belong to someone else. When that day comes, don't teach them only how to make candles. Teach them how to notice the quiet things. The sound of snow. The comfort of warm light. The kindness of neighbors. The patience to wait. Because candles burn for only a little while. But the warmth they leave behind can last a lifetime. You closed the notebook gently. For a long moment, you said nothing. The room was perfectly still. Outside, a small bird landed on the windowsill. Its cheerful song filled the quiet workshop. It was the first birdsong you had heard in many weeks. You looked outside. Near the edge of the garden, something small caught your eye. A single white flower had pushed through the snow. Winter was beginning to let go. You walked downstairs and unlocked the shop. The brass bell welcomed another peaceful morning. Soon, the familiar faces began to arrive. Eleanor came for her vanilla candle. The baker brought fresh bread. Oliver proudly announced that he had made another candle at home. Even the elderly man from the cottage stopped by, carrying your empty glass jar. I thought you might use it again. You thanked him. Nothing in this village seemed to be wasted. Not jars. Not candles. Not kindness. As evening arrived, you decided to make one final candle for the season. Not for sale. Not for the festival. Not for anyone else. Just for yourself. You melted the last piece of winter beeswax. Added a little pine. A little cinnamon. A small piece of dried orange peel. The same recipe as your very first candle. When it had cooled, you carried it outside. Snow still rested quietly across the fields. The sky glowed with the soft colors of sunset. You lit the candle. Its tiny flame danced peacefully in the cold evening air. You stood there until the first stars appeared above the village. Looking at the little light in your hands. Thinking about everything winter had quietly given you. A home. Friends. Purpose. And countless peaceful moments you would never forget. You smiled. When you first arrived, you thought you had come here to learn how to make candles. But winter had taught you something far more valuable. Sometimes, the brightest light isn't the one inside a candle. It's the quiet warmth we leave in the hearts of others. And as the last winter evening slowly faded into spring, the little candle shop continued glowing gently beneath the snowy sky, waiting patiently for another beautiful season to begin.